What took place? About half an hour after leaving for the hotel where his company's entrance ceremony was taking place, my grandson Keith returned home. His steps were heavy and slow, and his face was clouded. Nothing. Obviously, it's not nothing. Would you discuss it with your grandfather? Keith remained silent, but after I persisted, he eventually revealed what had transpired. The HR department reportedly changed the ceremony, scheduled a date before, and booked the hotel at the wrong time. That notification never reached Keith. They branded me recklessly and stated, "You probably just overslept and are lying about not getting the notice." My wife put a gentle hand on his back in an attempt to console him, but her hand abruptly froze. Her face became more and more pallid. I stepped behind Keith, wondering what was going on, and realizing at a way why. A piece of A4 paper was attached to his back. It made my blood boil to see it. "Don't be concerned. Grandpa will handle this. I am well aware of the culprit. He has the potential to bring down the entire business if we don't remove him from his position right away. I'm Howard Smith, and I'm 65. I served as president of a large snack manufacturer until I was 60 years old. Our specialty was rice snacks, but sales had been down for some time due to shifting trends. The company then recovered after we introduced a rice flour cookie that became quite popular. Because of that achievement, I was able to leave the company in the hands of a trusted team member and retire on my own terms instead of being evicted. I now live in peace with my wife and grandchild as chairman. I was thrilled when my grandson Keith said he wanted to work with us. He wanted to make kids happy the way he had been made to feel when he ate the delights we made. Our company's mission statement is ideally aligned with making a lot of kids smile. Hearing those comments from my cherished grandchild made me really happy. Keith successfully applied through the standard selection process since he wanted to rely just on his own abilities. On my behalf, I didn't provide any recommendations. During the recruiting process, nobody knew he was my grandson because we had the same last name, Smith. His big day, the company's admission ceremony, came today. "All right, Grandpa, I'm going. Be careful and have fun." Have fun during the entry ceremony. I'd only hope that my nervousness won't cause me to say something inappropriate. Wearing his brand new suit, which he was still getting used to, my wife and I bid him farewell. There would be a reception to welcome guests following the wedding. My wife and I had just begun talking about our lunch plans when we heard the door open. I'm back. Less than 30 minutes later, Keith was back. His steps were heavy, and his face was gloomy. What could possibly have caused Keith to appear so defeated? Anger shot through me. Out of pure fury, I nearly demanded an explanation, but I tried to remain composed and softened my tone as much as possible. What happened? Nothing. Obviously, it's not nothing. Can't you explain the situation to Grandpa? Keith remained silent for a long time, but when I kept asking him, he eventually told me the entire tale. From the station, I attempted to board the shuttle bus, but it never arrived. The station is a 5-minute walk from our house, and it takes roughly 10 minutes to drive to the hotel where the wedding was conducted. Keith arrived at the station 10 minutes before the planned pickup time because he had departed early. Because he had left early. But the bus never came, and there was not a single other new arrival to be seen. He called a couple new recruits with whom he had exchanged contact information since he felt something wasn't right, but nobody answered. After that, he called the business immediately and was confronted with the starting reality. HR had made a mistake and had rescheduled the ceremony the day before, as well as booked the hotel for the incorrect time. None of his colleagues could check their phones because everyone was already in the ceremony. Keith claimed he hadn't got any notification, but nobody took him seriously. So he therefore took a cab to the location. He told the door personnel what was going on, but they still wouldn't let him in. They didn't let you in. Why not? They said, "You probably overslept and are just pretending you didn't get the notice. and called me irresponsible. I was speechless. Such an unprofessional response was shocking. It wasn't about Keith. Calling someone irresponsible without hearing them out is simply unacceptable for any employee. So I guess it looks like I just skipped my own entrance ceremony. They must think I'm unreliable now. My wife gently placed a hand on his back to comfort him, but then her hand suddenly stopped. Her face grew paler and paler. Wondering what was going on, I moved behind Keith and immediately understood the reason. There, taped to his back, was a sheet of A4 paper. Seeing it made my anger boil over. What's wrong? Trying not to let him see, I carefully peeled the paper off. Scrawled across it were mocking words calling him useless. Grandpa's going to take care of this. Thank you, but really, you don't have to. I'd rather not have everyone know I'm your grandson. I'll prove myself starting tomorrow. This isn't just about you. If they treat one person like this, others will suffer too. Who did this? Keith stubbornly refused to tell me, but I have more experience in the workplace. I managed to persuade him and identified the employee who had made the harsh comment to Keith. With Keith in tow, I headed straight to the hotel where the ceremony was held. Well, look who's back, the rookie who missed his own ceremony. Standing in front of the entrance, a man sneered at Keith. Oh, you brought Grandpa along. Good for you. Beside him, a young woman mocked Keith as though she were talking to a child. Long time no see, Kevin. However, the moment I said that, the expression on Kevin's face, the head of human resources, froze. Why are you here? Kevin had always been problematic. He had excellent sales figures, but was notorious for his arrogance toward junior employees while constantly flattering his superiors. When I was CEO, no amount of pressure from other executives could make me let him lead a team. But after I retired, it seemed they'd promoted him. When I first heard his name and title from Keith, I was genuinely stunned. The woman beside him must have joined the company after I stepped down. She was whispering, "Who is this?" Clearly unaware of who I was. This young man is my grandson. Kevin, you'll let us in, won't you? Of course, I'll escort you both inside immediately. Kevin snapped to attention as if saluting and directed the young woman to guide Keith inside. So you were the one who sent Keith home, weren't you? My deepest apologies. I thought I had notified everyone, so I assumed he was just making excuses for being late. Even if it were an excuse, it's unacceptable to call a new employee irresponsible. On top of that, you're the head of HR. I'll be conducting an internal review, and disciplinary action may follow. Kevin's face went blank at my stern words. Sir, I don't always act this way. It's just that, well, my son was joining the company today, and I got carried away. Maybe a little overconfident. Oh, is that so? You don't want disciplinary action with your son joining, I take it. I placed my hands on his shoulders. Now tell me, who's that woman? From the handwriting on the paper taped to Keith's back, it seemed likely she was responsible. Judging by her behavior, I had little doubt it was her doing. She's my subordinate, Madison. And what's your relationship with her? Sweat began to pour down Kevin's face. Relationship? I'm not sure what you mean. Not a professional one. Clearly. How about it? You don't have to tell me, but if you don't, I'll have no choice but to start a formal investigation. Kevin finally gave in and confessed that he was involved in an adult relationship with her. So you've been divorced in the past 5 years then? Well, not exactly. It's more of an in-between status. In between. Which is it? At my insistence, Kevin admitted that he was still on good terms with his wife and had never even considered divorce despite seeing Madison on the side. Since you've been honest, I'll let you go for today. Thank you. I'll never forget this kindness. I left the event floor through one of the side doors, not to truly leave, of course. I circled back through the hotel's main floor and requested to speak with Keller, the general manager. If Kevin remains head of HR, the company's in serious trouble. I needed to secure evidence to remove him from his position. I could press further using his relationship with Madison as leverage, but that might allow him to make a comeback once things cooled down. So I contacted Michelle, my secretary, to probe from another angle while I persuaded Keller, the general manager, I knew to lend me a uniform. With it, I personally infiltrated the venue. The time had come for the reception. The ceremony hall had shifted to an adjacent room, and everyone, minus a few, seemed to be enjoying themselves. Hey, you're pretty bold eating here when you couldn't even make it on time. A young man who seemed to be a peer put his arm around Keith's shoulder. Kyle, one of the senior staff nearby, told me to eat up, so I think it'd be rude not to. Fair enough. Come over here then. Kyle walked Keith to a table and grabbed a chair from a line along the wall. I watched curiously as he set a large serving platter in front of Keith. Although the food was buffet style, Kyle had brought the entire platter. Eat it all. You're supposed to have a big appetite, right? I couldn't possibly eat all this. Besides, other people probably want some too. Don't like the sushi. I could swap it out for something else if you'd like. The man leaned in closer to Keith, who looked completely at a loss. Don't make a fuss, or I'll tell my dad. I think even someone like you can remember I'm the son of the head of HR, right? Resigned, Keith quietly began eating the sushi. I had to admit, Kevin's influence on his son was quite impressive. Spotting Kevin alone in a quieter moment, I approached him. Kevin, there's a message for you from the front desk. Dressed in uniform, I played the role of a hotel staff member. A message. Why would they leave a message at the desk when I got my phone on me? They were very insistent on delivering it directly. From your Chairman Smith. It took Kevin a moment to realize that the staff member standing in front of him was actually me. Mr. Smith, I thought you'd already left. I remembered something I needed to take care of. Look over there. Kevin nearly fainted at the sight of his son forcing Keith to eat excessively. This is a welcome party for new employees. Has some common sense. It was surprising to hear Kevin even mention the word common sense. Stop that useless son of yours, but don't let on that he's my grandson. Understood. Kevin rushed across the room with determination. What do you think you're doing, Dad? I was just teaching this guy a lesson for getting too cocky. Disciplining employees is HR's job. You're a new hire yourself, so don't act like you're in charge. He had likely grown up being completely validated by his father. Kyle looked at Kevin with an expression of disbelief. Fine. You want me to stop, right? I'll stop. That's right. For the sake of my future, stop right now. Kevin had just felt relieved when Kyle deliberately tipped over a large platter of sushi onto the floor. Oops, looks like I slipped while trying to clean up. You can handle it. It seemed that Kyle had no intention of backing down. He tried to make Keith take care of it. Are you all right, sir? I approached Kyle from behind, maintaining my role as a staff member. Who are you? I'm with the venue staff. I'll take care of the food. Please continue enjoying yourselves. Keith noticed me and tried to assist, but I gestured subtly for him to hold back. I got down on my hands and knees on the fine carpet, picking up every last grain of rice. I'll help. Kevin, now flustered, began to follow my lead. Why are you helping? Let the hotel staff handle it. It's their job to cater to customers and do whatever we say. In a low voice, I leaned toward him. They say children learn by example. Do you treat restaurant staff like this too? Of course not. My son just can't stand it when things don't go his way. Kevin's hands were shaking, and he kept missing grains of rice. Ever since training, you've been overly idealistic and creepy. With a sneer, Kyle closed the distance between him and Keith, making Keith smile. You sound like some children's TV host. What's wrong with wanting to make kids smile? Isn't that how this company began? Now you're bringing the company into this. Have you lost your mind? Kevin's face quickly grew pale. It was only natural, considering it was as if his own son had confessed to wrongdoing. Armed with some fresh information I'd gotten from Michelle earlier, I turned to Kyle. Had you ever actually looked at your company's website? Kyle was taken aback by the sudden change in the hotel staff's demeanor. Who do you think you are, talking down to me like that? Our company spends a fortune here. I could have my dad stop doing business with this hotel. Then I'll make sure your father can't pull something like that. I stood up and grabbed Kyle's arm with my rice-covered hand. Gross. Let go. So this is how you educate your son. Letting him call his own company's chairman gross. I directed the question to Kevin, but he didn't respond. He was too preoccupied with quickly coming up with an excuse to protect himself, leaving no time to listen. What chairman? Seriously, does this hotel employ old men who can't even communicate properly? I figured it was about time, so I pulled up the image that had been sent to my phone. This is a record of a certain money transfer. Do you know what the money was for? Kyle glanced at the name on the transfer and seemed to realize immediately what it was about. I don't know. Then answer me this. What is our company's mission statement? It's a question we always ask in executive interviews. There's no way you wouldn't know. Kyle said nothing. He must have realized that saying the wrong thing would end everything for him. If you don't answer, I'll assume you don't know. I just forgot. That's all. Forgot? That's strange. I glanced over at Keith. You just said it yourself a moment ago, didn't you? To bring smiles to as many children as possible. That's our company's mission. I forced Kevin, still kneeling on the floor, to stand up. It seems your son doesn't know our mission statement. I wonder why. My son said something so impressive in the interview that the board couldn't help but be impressed. Even the other executives praised him. Let's say that's true. Then how do you explain this image? The next image I displayed was a series of messages. A conversation between Kevin and one of the executives, the same man associated with the money transfer. So, you paid $1,000 to make sure your son got hired. Huh. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my anger, but I couldn't hold it back. What was the head of HR thinking? You shameless disgrace. I'm so sorry. While everyone in the room watched us intently, one woman was trying to sneak out quietly. It was Madison. Madison, I have proof you were involved in this too. Don't even think about running. I couldn't go against Kevin. He threatened to spread my embarrassing photos if I didn't cooperate, she said in a frail voice, as if about to cry. It seemed she was trying to garner some sympathy, but Kyle wasn't having it. Hey Madison, you told me when I was still in college that you'd make sure I got hired because you liked my face. Don't pretend you weren't the one leading the charge, only to try and save yourself now. What? Madison? No way. I only dated Madison because I liked her face too. We both knew it was just for fun, so I didn't mind that she was still involved with my dad. That's all it was. Kevin was devastated, now fully aware that he and his son had been involved with the same woman. You remember that photo from my coming-of-age ceremony that you showed Madison? Turns out she liked it so much that she even waited for me at the university. I wish you hadn't shown it to her. This was beyond unbearable. I'll leave the three of you to deal with this yourselves. You'll have plenty of time to talk things over once you've left the company. Later, all three of them left the company officially as voluntary resignations. Although it was meant to keep things quiet, someone in HR who had a grudge against Kevin leaked the details of their departure to neighboring major firms. At every networking event attended by executives from various companies, I would hear, they applied here, but we turned them down. I couldn't shake a bad feeling about all of it. We should have done this from the start. Mr. Kennedy, please let the three of us back into the company. When I was suddenly summoned by President Kennedy, I arrived to find Kevin and the others there. Apparently, they hadn't been able to secure new jobs and had been lingering at the entrance, refusing to leave until they met with him. Kennedy, the current president, is neither my son nor a relative. My son went to college in Tokyo with dreams of starting his own business. Later, securing a job in the city, within a few years he branched out on his own and is now successfully managing his own company. Kennedy and I don't just lack a close relationship. We practically rival each other. The three of them probably thought turning to him would somehow work in their favor. While I prioritize bringing joy to children regardless of cost, Kennedy is a strict realist. We rarely see eye to eye on anything. Mr. Kennedy, aren't you and Mr. Smith like cats and dogs? If you let us back in, it'd be the ultimate way to get under his skin, don't you think? Madison, hoping to get closer to Kennedy, unbuttoned her shirt down to the third button and tried to make a move. Sure, we may not be on the best terms, but you know I'm a realist, right? Of course. I'm confident in my sales skills. Realistically, I'm a valuable asset, aren't I? It was only because I was in HR that things didn't work out. Put me in charge of sales this time. I'm a top-notch graduate from a prestigious university. Even as a new hire, I can deliver results right away. Let's get this old guy out of the company. Kennedy smiled slightly. They took his reaction as a sign they might be able to return to the company, watching him with hopeful faces. If it came down to choosing between you three or Mr. Smith, I'd have to go with him. After all, his grandson is crucial to this company. Just when they thought they were about to claw their way back up, they felt like they'd been pushed off a cliff and into despair. You're aware, aren't you? The rice flour cookies that helped revive our business. That was his idea. Just when I was starting to feel like I'd reached my limit, I asked Keith, what kind of sweets are trending lately? He told me, I'm really into rice flour treats, but I wish they were more affordable and easier to get. The cookies, inspired by his idea, became a hit, especially praised by parents of children with wheat allergies. With the product's success, we expanded it into a series, making it one of our flagship items. We needed someone with an eye for trends and a good sense of taste. Plus, having the founder's grandson join with the same passion as his grandfather provided a perfect backstory. If he creates another kit product, the media will be all over it. No way am I letting that kind of talent slip through my fingers. As for the three who were so quickly cut off, I decided to tell them what I hadn't had the chance to say before. You dragged me into your twisted web of relationships, and it distracted me for a moment. But listen, rice is a valuable raw material for our company. Neither people who would throw rice to the ground, nor their parents who raised them to be like that, have any place here. As the three remained frozen in place, Kennedy looked over at me with a glint of amusement. What? They threw rice on the ground? Wish I'd seen that. Please don't joke about things like that, even in jest. Kennedy has no use for social gatherings. He routinely avoids them, including company parties. Even at the annual orientation ceremony, he leaves as soon as he's done with his speech. Had he been present at that moment, things would have probably gotten even messier. I was grateful he hadn't been there. Curious about what happened to those three, later on I asked Michelle to look into it and found they were in an unexpected place. All three, even Madison, ended up working at Kevin's wife's company. Kevin's wife had taken over her father's construction business. Madison initially resisted working at the same company as her affair partner's wife, but she had leaned on Kevin from the start, barely doing any actual work. Since she couldn't find another man in power to rely on, she reluctantly agreed to stay on. Though they tried to keep their relationship secret, someone had tipped off Kevin's wife, knowing everything. She hired them anyway, intending to teach her husband and his lover a lesson, and to re-educate her son. She put them to work, not in the office, but out in the field. It was clear that none of the three were cut out for manual labor. When Kennedy heard the story, He went to the construction site to capture the scene on video, amused as they were repeatedly yelled at by a supervisor. I can only hope that this experience reminded them of a childhood lesson, to never do to others what you wouldn't want done to yourself. So, Keith, are you enjoying working at the company? About 6 months had passed since he joined the company. I had heard something from Kennedy, so I brought it up with Keith over dinner. Well, actually, there's a project I'm working on that might get approved soon. I can't share details yet, but if it goes through, I'll buy some for you, Grandpa. Is that so? I'll be looking forward to it. In truth, I already knew all about the project, but I pretended not to, wanting to see the joy on his face. Keith is working on developing a modern version of rice crackers, aiming to release a product that represents our style. He plans to launch a spiced version geared toward adults to first capture the attention of parents, eventually expanding the line to include products for children. Kennedy gave it his strong approval, saying it was sure to be a hit, considering it sounded like a moneymaker. I'll protect this company that Grandpa started from a humble candy store. Hearing such words from my promising grandson, my wife, and I felt determined to stay around for as long as possible.
The day I moved in with Uncle John and Aunt Maria, my life took a sharp turn. Their house was nothing like the warm, loving home I'd lost. It was colder, stricter, a place where laughter seemed to echo with a hint of bitterness. Ellie, their daughter, met me with a stare that could freeze boiling water. "Great, now we've got a charity case living with us," Ellie muttered under her breath as I lugged my suitcase into what would be my new room. Ed Maria shot her a look. "Ellie, that's enough. She's family and we're doing the right thing." Uncle John, a man of few words, simply nodded. "You'll follow our rules here, Ruth. We expect you to contribute like everyone else," Maria added. I nodded too, overwhelmed to speak. I was just 11, trying to find my footing in a world that had suddenly turned upside down after my parents died in a car accident. The first few days were a blur of new rules and chores. Ellie made sure to remind me of my place at every turn. "Why are you even here? You're not really one of us," she sneered one day as we washed dishes. "Just a little orphan girl living off our charity," she added, her words cutting deep. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed listening to the silence of the house, missing my parents more than ever. Tears were my only solace, but I never let Ellie or her parents hear me cry. I made a silent vow to myself. I would endure no matter what. Helping with the housework became my escape, and Maria was particular about how things were done. "You call this clean?" she'd often scold, pointing at a spot I'd missed on the floor. "Sorry, Aunt Maria. I'll do it again," I'd say, grabbing the mop and going over the spot until she was satisfied. Uncle John was a stern man, his words sparing but sharp. "We're not running a hotel here, Ruth. Pull your weight," he'd remind me, even though I was already doing more chores than Ellie. Ellie, for her part, never missed a chance to make my life harder. She'd hide my sewing supplies, knowing how much I loved to sew, then feign innocence when I couldn't find them. "Looking for these?" she'd taunt, holding my scissors just out of reach. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed listening to the silence of the house, missing my parents more than ever. Tears were my only solace, but I never let Ellie or her parents hear me cry. I made a silent vow to myself. I would endure no matter what. Helping with the housework became my escape, and Maria was particular about how things were done. "You call this clean?" she'd often scold, pointing at a spot I'd missed on the floor. "Sorry, Aunt Maria, I'll do it again," I'd say, grabbing the mop and going over the spot until she was satisfied. Uncle John was a stern man, his words sparing but sharp. "We're not running a hotel here, Ruth. Pull your weight," he'd remind me, even though I was already doing more chores than Ellie. Ellie, for her part, never missed a chance to make my life harder. She'd hide my sewing supplies, knowing how much I loved to sew, then feign innocence when I couldn't find them. "Looking for these?" she'd taunt, holding my scissors just out of reach. "Maybe if you're nice to me, I'll give them back," she'd say with a smirk. But I never retaliated. I kept to myself, burying my hurt and focusing on my sewing. It was my one joy, the thread that connected me to happier times with my parents. I started with doll clothes, moving on to alter whatever old clothes I could find. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Life with Uncle John and Aunt Maria was a mixed bag. They provided a roof over my head, sure, but it was Ellie who made sure I never forgot I was different. Amid the coldness and the chores, I found my escape in a corner of my room with a needle, thread, and old fabrics that whispered promises of transformation. One evening, as I was turning a faded curtain into a skirt, Ellie barged into my room without knocking. "What are you doing with that old rag?" she sneered, her eyes scanning my makeshift sewing station. "Just making something new," I replied, keeping my focus on the fabric under my hands. I wasn't about to let her see how much her words stung. Encouraged by Kelly's reaction, I started spending every spare moment sewing. My room became a sanctuary filled with fabric scraps and dreams stitched into reality. Each piece I created was a step away from the identity Ellie and her parents imposed on me. One Saturday, as I was cutting into a dress that Aunt Maria had declared too old, Uncle John walked in. "What's all this?" he grumbled, surveying the mess of fabrics and patterns scattered around. "I'm making something new to wear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady under his scrutiny. "It seems like a waste of time," he muttered, picking up a piece of fabric and twisting it in his hands. "You should focus on your chores, not play dress up." His words were like a slap, dismissing not just my passion but my efforts to rise above my circumstances. Despite their disdain, I couldn't stop sewing. It became more than a hobby. It was my rebellion, my claim to an identity they couldn't touch. Each stitch was a word in the narrative I was writing for myself, one where I wasn't just the orphan niece, but Ruth, the girl who could create beauty from neglect. Things took a sharp turn after I hit 18. Ellie got herself a shiny new car for her birthday, a sleek thing that made my heart sink every time it roared to life. Meanwhile, Uncle John and Aunt Maria suddenly upgraded their lives with fancy gadgets and furniture that seemed out of place in our modest home. It was clear they were living it up while I was left figuring out how to stretch every penny. One day, as I was mulling over the idea of getting a job post-high school, Maria dropped a bombshell. "Your parents left you some money for college," she said nonchalantly. I was stunned. "Really? I had no idea." "Yeah, but there's a catch," Uncle John chimed in, his tone sharp. "You're staying local for college. It's safer, and we can keep an eye on you." My dream of leaving for a big city to study fashion design crumbled, but I knew arguing would be futile. I started, but Maria cut me off. "We've decided. You can thank us later." I swallowed my protests. Arguing was pointless, so I enrolled in the local college, my dreams of fashion design barely hanging by a thread. Needing to support myself and save for the future, I landed a job as an assistant secretary at a law office nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. "Look at you, all grown up and working," Ellie sneered one evening as I was sketching designs. "Still playing dress up, I see." "Better than playing spoiled brat," I retorted without looking up. My patience with her was wearing thin. She huffed, clearly annoyed, and stormed out. I couldn't help but smile a little. For once, I had the last word. Despite the setbacks, I didn't give up on fashion. Every evening after work and classes, I'd dive into my world of sketches and fabrics, transforming Ellie's discarded clothes into pieces that felt like me. It was my rebellion, my way of holding on to the dream, even if it was stitched together from the leftovers of someone else's life. "Working late again, Ruth?" my coworker Mike asked one evening as he passed by my desk. "Yeah, got a project I'm passionate about," I replied, packing up my sketches discreetly. Must be nice having something you love doing, he said, a hint of envy in his voice. It is, I admitted, feeling a surge of pride. It's not much, but it's mine. Walking home that night, I felt a mix of emotions. Frustration for sure, at the way my life was hemmed in by my guardian's decisions, but also determination. I might have been forced to stay local, but I wasn't going to let that define me or my future. The more time passed, the more I started to feel like I was living in a house of cards about to crumble at any moment. Uncle John and Aunt Maria, who once lived as modestly as monks, were suddenly splurging like lottery winners. First, it was Aunt Maria flaunting a fur coat so pricey it could have fed us for months. Then Uncle John brought home a TV so big you'd think we were running a cinema out of our living room. And Ellie, who never lifted a finger for work or study, was now flashing gadgets I'd only seen in glossy magazine ads. It didn't add up. I wasn't a genius at math, but even I knew our household budget couldn't magically stretch to cover luxury splurges. They were being dodgy about where all this cash was coming from, and it set my nerves on edge. One evening at dinner, with a new TV blaring some reality show in the background, I decided to poke the bear. So where's all this new stuff coming from? Last I checked, we weren't hitting the jackpot every week, I said, trying to keep my voice light, but my words came out sharper than I intended. Aunt Maria shot me a look, her eyes narrowing. That's none of your business, young lady, she snapped, her tone icy. Uncle John, caught off guard, almost choked on his food, coughing as he managed to say, "Well, I got a promotion at work. Yeah, that's it, a big one." "Promotion, huh?" I pressed, not buying it for a second. Must have been one heck of a jump to start throwing money around like this. Ellie, sensing tension, quickly chimed in with her usual snark. "What's it to you, Ruth? Jealous much? Not all of us need to scrape by, you know." I clenched my fists under the table, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. Just curious is all. Seems weird, doesn't it? Suddenly living like kings out of nowhere? The room went silent, the only sound coming from the TV's chatter. Uncle John and Aunt Maria exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Uncle John cleared his throat. "Let's just say we've been careful with our savings, all right? No need to worry your little head about it." Careful with savings, right? I thought to myself. I knew something was off. The dots weren't connecting, and their answers were as flimsy as a house of cards in a windstorm. That night, as I lay in bed, the pieces of the puzzle nagged at me. The fur coat, the TV, Ellie's gadgets, and the endless documents they had me sign, always with the excuse that it was for benefits or some other vague reason. I trusted them, never bothering to read what I was signing. But lying there, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Could those signatures of mine be the source of their sudden wealth? The deception swirling around my guardian's sudden wealth weighed heavily on me. But amidst the chaos, a sliver of light shone through. Tom. He worked part-time at the law office, a law student with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Our connection was immediate, a bond formed over shared dreams and the mundane realities of life. One afternoon, while organizing files, our hands brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through me. We locked eyes and he smiled. "Ruth, you ever think about escaping this place?" he asked, his voice low. "All the time," I admitted, feeling a flush of warmth. "But it feels like I'm stuck in quicksand." He nodded, understanding. "Well, if you ever need a partner in crime, you know where to find me." It was a joke, but it sparked something between us, a flicker of rebellion against the constraints of our lives. Our secret rendezvous became the highlight of my days, stolen moments filled with laughter and dreams. But as our connection deepened, Aunt Maria grew suspicious. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. "I've seen you sneaking around with that boy from the office." "Don't think I haven't noticed," she hissed, her eyes boring into mine. I tried to keep my composure. Tom's just a friend, Aunt Maria. Nothing to worry about. A friend, huh? Don't play me for a fool, Ruth. You're not to see him again. It's for your own good, she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. I was stunned. You can't control who I see or what I feel. Tom's a good person. Aunt Maria's face hardened. I won't have you ruining your future for some boy. You'll thank me one day. I bit my tongue, anger and frustration boiling inside. It was clear she wouldn't listen. From that moment, Tom and I knew we had to meet in secret. Our love, a forbidden flame that refused to be extinguished. Looks like we're modern-day Romeo and Juliet, Tom joked one night as we huddled in the shadows of a park, far from prying eyes. I guess that makes Aunt Maria the villain in our story, I replied, trying to smile despite the bitterness in my heart. We'll find a way out of this, Ruth, together, Tom said, taking my hand. His determination was comforting, a beacon of hope in the darkness. But our secret meetings couldn't go unnoticed forever. Ellie, ever the spy, caught us one day and wasted no time in running back to Aunt Maria and Uncle John. The confrontation that followed was explosive. You're grounded. No more job, no more college until you learn your place, Uncle John declared, his face red with anger. You can't do this. You're not my jailers, I shot back, defiant rising in me. Aunt Maria's laugh was cold and sharp. Oh, but we can, dear. You'll learn to obey, or you'll lose everything. The threat was real, and the stakes were higher than ever. In the dead of night, Tom and I made plans to fight back, to reclaim my inheritance and our freedom. It's us against the world, Ruth. We'll expose their lies and build our own future, Tom whispered, his words a vow I clung to. It was a chilly Thursday evening, the kind where the wind seemed to whisper secrets as it passed. Tom and I were huddled in the dim light of his tiny apartment, the only place we felt safe from Aunt Maria and Uncle John's prying eyes. The documents I had secretly photographed lay spread out on the coffee table between us, a silent testament to the betrayal I was about to uncover. Are you sure you're ready for this, Ruth? Tom asked, his voice laced with concern. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. I need to know, no matter how bad it is. We started with the will of my parents, a document I had never seen before. As Tom read it aloud, the reality of their love for me, their hopes for my future, hit me hard. They had left me not just their savings, but also investments and properties, a legacy meant to secure my life. And there, in clear legal language, was the clause about my inheritance coming into full effect at 18, I murmured. So, they've been lying to you, Ruth, all this time, Tom said, his voice tight with anger. But why? How could they just use me like this? The betrayal stung, a bitter pill to swallow. We dug deeper, examining the documents I had signed. Tom's legal knowledge helped unravel the complex web of deceit. Look here, he pointed out. By signing this, you basically allowed them access to your funds. They've been funneling your inheritance into their accounts. The realization hit me like a freight train. My trust, my loyalty had been manipulated to fund their lavish lifestyle. I can't believe this. They told me it was all for benefits, for my college fund, I said, feeling naive and foolish. It's classic fraud, Ruth, and it's illegal. You have rights, Tom reassured me, his hand finding mine. The next steps were daunting. We discussed lawyers, legal battles, and the possibility of going public. The thought of facing Aunt Maria and Uncle John, exposing them for the frauds they were, made my stomach churn. We'll need evidence, solid proof that can't be dismissed, Tom said, already plotting our course of action. I was scared, more scared than I'd ever been, but the fire of justice burned within me. Let's do it. Let's expose them. I can't let them get away with this, I said, the determination in my voice surprising even me. I was no longer the timid girl who had arrived at their doorstep seeking refuge. I was a woman wronged, ready to claim what was rightfully mine. The plan was set. We would gather more evidence, consult with a lawyer Tom knew, and build a case that would stand up in court. It was going to be a long, hard fight, but I was ready. Ready to face the guardians who had become my oppressors. Ready to reclaim my life and my future. The days leading up to the court date were a blur. Tom and I spent every moment poring over documents, meeting with our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and preparing our case. The evidence was solid, but the thought of facing Aunt Maria and Uncle John in court made my stomach twist in knots. Remember, it's about the truth, Mr. Henderson reminded me as we sat in his cluttered office, papers strewn about. Stick to the facts and we'll get through this. The day of reckoning arrived faster than I had hoped. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and filled with the murmur of onlookers. Uncle John and Aunt Maria sat across from us, their faces stoic, betraying no sign of guilt. Miss Thompson, can you confirm that you were unaware of the contents of the documents you were signing at the request of the defendants? The judge asked, his gaze fixed on me. Yes, Your Honor. I trusted them. I thought they were looking out for me, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Aunt Maria's lawyer was slick, trying to paint me as an ungrateful niece, biting the hand that fed her. Isn't it true that the defendants provided you with a home and care after your parents' tragic demise? He asked, his tone dripping with insinuation. They did, but that doesn't give them the right to steal my inheritance, I shot back, refusing to be intimidated. The turning point came when Tom took the stand, presenting the financial records we had uncovered. These documents clearly show the transfer of funds from Miss Thompson's accounts to the defendants immediately following her signature on the documents they presented to her, he explained, his confidence undercutting the defense's arguments. Aunt Maria and Uncle John squirmed in their seats, their facultative finale cracking under the weight of evidence against them. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates a breach of trust and fraudulent activity by the defendants. I hereby order the immediate restitution of all misappropriated funds to Miss Thompson, along with appropriate penalties for the defendants. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Justice had been served. Outside, the sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. You did it, Ruth. You stood up for yourself, Tom said, wrapping me in a hug. I couldn't have done it without you, I whispered, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. With my inheritance rightfully returned, I set my sights on the future. I started studying to be a designer, fulfilling my long-held dream. It was difficult but interesting, and I was fair to myself. Years flew by, turning pages filled with trials into chapters of triumph. My atelier, once just a dream woven from threads of hope and defiance, now stood as a testament to my journey. I had built a name for myself in the city, not just as a fashion designer, but as a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, as the autumn sun cast long shadows across my studio, Ellie barged in, her presence as unwelcome as a storm cloud. Ruth, you've got to help me, she started without a greeting, her voice a mix of demand and despair. I'm in deep, really deep. I need money. I paused, the shock of her audacity giving way to a cold sense of inevitability. Ellie, I can't just hand you money, but I can offer you a job. Work for it, earn it, I offered. Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. A job? Are you kidding me? I don't need a job, Ruth. I need cash, and I need it now. She spat, her eyes blazing with anger. I stood my ground, feeling the weight of our shared past heavy between us. I won't fuel your mistakes, Ellie. A job is all I'm offering. Take it or leave it, I said firmly. Her fury boiled over. You think you're better than me now, huh? Just because you play dress-up for a living? She sneered, her words laced with venom. No, Ellie. I worked hard for everything I have. I'm offering you a chance to do the same, I replied, my voice steady. Ellie's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. I don't need your charity or your lectures. You'll regret this, Ruth, she said as she stormed out. I felt a wave of sadness for what we both had lost, but also a deep, unshakable conviction in my choices. I had learned the hard way that no one could save you if you weren't willing to save yourself. Weeks later, news trickled down to me that Aunt Maria and Uncle John's house had been sold off to cover debts. Ellie had vanished, chasing after windfalls that would never come. The cycle of choices and consequences had come full circle. Sitting in my studio, surrounded by the vibrant chaos of creativity, I reflected on the journey. From the ashes of a broken past, I had carved out a space where dreams took shape, where resilience was the fabric of success. Tom, now my husband and partner in every sense, placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled, leaning into his strength. "Yeah, I am. It's just life's funny, isn't it? How it all turns out." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's not just life, Ruth. It's you. You made this happen. You turned the odds into your masterpiece." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, I realized he was right. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was a whole new book, one where the pages were filled with the colors of hard-won joy and the quiet strength of redemption.
She was like a younger, ostentatious female boss to me. She was caught in a sudden shower, and I saw her real face. She looks up at me and asks provocatively, "Do you want to see more?" I find myself holding my breath. "Do you want to come to my place?" When she blurted these words out, her response was, "I'm Michael Collins, and this year I turned 28. Please be patient with me while I briefly discuss my upbringing and life's journey." "I have it all from birth." "Oh, that one," would be the admiring response from everyone if I mentioned the name of the company I've worked for. I was born the son of the company's president. My parents adored me without showing any preference, despite the fact that I was the second son. By the time I completed primary school, it had already been settled that my older brother would inherit my father's company. I had to choose my own route then. My parents shared a strong commitment to education. Fortunately, I did better in my studies than the majority of my classmates, so I didn't detest it. About the time I was in high school, I came to the realization that I was inherently smart, perhaps just like my father. A gift I never took for granted despite being born with. I worked hard to live up to my parents' expectations. A part of me thought I was just a little bit superior to my brother. Despite his kindness, I saw him as just another male. His benevolence was the only thing that set him apart. "That's a big deal," my mother observed, but I wasn't happy with my brother, the one who carried all the burdens of our parents and grandparents and was expected to take over the business despite my superior ability. I must have been a prickly, conceited man back then. Now that I think about it, it was awkward. I consider it a youthful mistake. I sincerely hoped that one day my parents would see my brilliance and replace their hair. But that day never materialized. After graduating from university, I wasn't too excited about job seeking because I had such bad intentions. Nevertheless, over 10 companies, including my top pick, sent me job offers. I was set to make my first move as a working adult, even though I was still not happy about the inheritance issue. That's when I had my first failure in life. My initial choice of employer was a well-known advertising agency. There were a lot of wealthy kids like myself when I joined. I, the person who was always the center of attention, was swiftly forgotten. The strange feeling of not being the center of attention unsettled me. I started to feel more and more nervous that I would not be able to control the scenario the way I had imagined. My natural haughtiness got in the way, and I disregarded the advice of my colleagues, making a grave error. Less than half a year passed before I made a fatal error. "I can handle everything on my own," I reasoned. It was an error brought about by my conceited notion. I just stared blankly as my boss apologizing to clients and my coworkers frantically covering for me. That was when I was shattered. The following day, I turned in my resignation. I never returned to work. I no longer wanted to socialize or meet new people who were aware of my existence. My anxious parents made arrangements for me to live in an apartment separately from our family house. I was evicted from my home and sought safety in an apartment that was made available to me. I started going outside after half a year, but I wasn't in the mood to look for a work. I had no job. I made it a daily goal to live a lazy life. I made the decision to live a life that totally rejected the person I used to be. I lived like this for a couple of years. I'd attribute my ability to reintegrate into society to a string of fortuitous little incidents. Movies were my only source of enjoyment throughout this period. My apartment was close to an art house movie theater. They screened foreign films, including some relatively obscure ones. At the conclusion of the year, they also screened all-night films in this little theater. It was a fine art house theater with strong ties to the neighborhood. One day, while purchasing a ticket as normal, I noticed an employment poster at the front desk. "Are you hiring staff?" As soon as I had my ticket, I inquired. I was informed that they had an unexpected vacancy and were hiring immediately. I was unaware of the kind of work that art house cinemas did at the time. When they said, "If you like movies, it's a fun job," I became interested right away. Applying for the job was my decision. My resume was brought the following day. I spoke with the manager of the theater right away, and I was hired right away. I remember being a little afraid, but everything went so well. In case it turned out to be a really severe firm, I was concerned about what to do. The day after the interview was when I was supposed to start work when I got back to my apartment. I was apprehensive about the nature of the work. It appeared like my job was just sales and publicity on the first day. Creating leaflets and posters, as well as displays within the theater and outdoors, were all part of the publicity activity. Sales comprised buying and promoting the movies that were going to be exhibited. Each member of the small crew was responsible for several responsibilities. "Hello, this is Michael Collins." I lowered my head and said "nice to meet you" to my supervisor, a girl who had a doll-like appearance. She actually did look like a small girl, yet I suppose I should label her a woman still. Her age, she was 5 years younger than me, surprised me once more. The manager of the movie theater confided in me that she was a part-time employee and had dropped out of high school. She appeared to have started working here after being asked whether she would like to work full-time after working many part-time jobs. After then, her efforts were reported to be enormous. They added that all the movies she bought were hits and that she had good taste at first. She is now a well-known great buyer in the business. My training was under her and the cinema manager's supervision. I obtained a younger boss in this way. With a younger girl as my employer, a week flew by. During that time, I soon learned about her powers. My acquired talents from my time as a student were useless. Every day, I would mentally torture myself over my incapacity. The manager of the movie theater advised, "Take your time to learn." However, I was proud to be an older guy and a man. My zeal ultimately turned into a wheel that invited failure. Her nickname for me was Junker each time it occurred. Junker quickly became my alias. I understood she was referring to me in a loving manner, so it wasn't sarcasm. However, being referred to as a Junker was also an embarrassment to me because I had been succeeding handily. "One day, I'll exact my revenge," I said to myself. This sensation would encourage my next error. Claire, my supervisor, is a doll-like beauty. Her white complexion and petite stature give her a delicate overall appearance. But over the past week, I've come to understand her strong inner nature all too well. In general, everyone at this place of employment is very eccentric. Frequently, the discussions held here border on sarcasm. I honestly believed at first that I had chosen the wrong job. But after I'd watched everyone for a bit, I became aware of how foolish my assumptions had been. Everyone is genuinely dedicated to their profession, and what may seem like hurtful jokes isn't meant to be taken that way. Arguments may arise as a result, but they will only last so long. No one participates in conversations that flatly contradict the views of others. They listened to my views even as a novice and offered suggestions with a hint of humor. In an environment where there's no need to put on a front of being well-versed in everything, employees seem to grow at a different rate. Michael, had you finished ordering the flyers? Claire gave me directions the moment she got back from the client meeting. Everything is well. The submission has been completed. Claire responded, not bad, for a younker, and set a gift on my desk, a convenience store cafe latte. She must have recalled that I only ever drink this while we're on a call outside. There were voices of discontent from the other desks. Why don't we get anything? Stop acting like a baby. Proceed to purchase it on your own. Claire is tenacious even when everyone else is older. She is practically the most powerful person here because she is just as severe with the theater manager. The theater manager laughed it off, adding, "That's just how it is with newbies, even though I feel a little privileged. I can't let people younger than me spoil me all the time." I made a promise to myself as I sipped my cafe coffee. One aspect of my work is sales. Claire was with me when I had an outside sales job one day. I was a little anxious because this was my first time going out with Claire, even though I had gone out a few times with the theater manager. We went to a few ticket offices and bookstores so that I could get used to traveling alone in the future. The weather was pleasant, and it had been sunny since the morning, but after we had visited approximately 5 locations, the sky began to go darker. It could pour. She inquired, "Do you have an umbrella?" "I don't usually carry one." Claire threw a worried glance up at the cloudy sky. It dawned on me that I had never seen her hold an umbrella. Just as I was going to inquire as to why she hadn't, a torrential downpour struck, an unexpected deluge. We were unable to take action in the matter. We were caught in the midst of a crosswalk and had to run. We were saturated even though we were able to hide from the rain under a store awning. We were drenched from head to toe in a matter of seconds. Claire made a frustrated clicking sound with her tongue. She removed her damp hair with a napkin, wearing an annoyed expression. The rain appeared to have somewhat smudged her makeup. She kicked my leg angrily and exclaimed, "This sucks." "I'm not the one who made it rain, you know," I said. There was unease in my gaze as I glanced down at Claire. Her face had a distinct quality to it. I believe her makeup was smeared, but something wasn't quite right. Upon thorough observation, I discovered the source of the discomfort. "Odd, Claire, did you have beauty marks under your eye?" Usually, she needs to cover them up with concealer or foundation. Her left eye had 3 lines of beauty marks. I got a slight thrill, like though I had just uncovered a secret about Miller. "Want to see more?" As she glanced up at me and spoke, my heart skipped a beat. It was quite seductive. These suddenly visible beauty marks had me completely enamored. I know full well that I always had a fascination for beauty marks. I involuntarily leaned in closer to Claire and gave her a downward glance. "Would you like to visit my home? This is not far from it." Claire's face flushed crimson red at what I said. I also began to experience some embarrassment. I'd attempted to defuse the situation, but before I could speak, I was quickly kicked in the shin. "Sorry. Hey, why did you do that? Cease talking. What a younker you are." Claire spat out these furious words, stopped talking nonsense, and hurried off, leaving me crouched in misery. She would be drenched when she arrived home because the rain hadn't stopped. I'm hoping she avoids getting a cold. I became concerned. Claire had evidently gone straight home and wasn't back at the office the next morning when I returned to the movie theater. Claire had a somewhat icy attitude. She was consciously staying away from me. Her welcomes were a little forced, and she refused to look at me. She delegated duties to other seniors even when I attempted to talk about it. I was being methodically barred from her domain. I was being questioned by other staff members. Hey, what did you do to her? Things became awkward as a result. I managed to catch up with Claire during the lunch break, but she refused to acknowledge me. I approached Claire in a corridor nook, hidden from other employees' view. Why are you avoiding me? I'm not trying to avoid you. She stared up at me. You're just imagining things, Junker, and I couldn't help but think back to what had transpired the day before. The 3 hidden beauty marks resurfaced when I gave Claire's left eye a gentle thumb massage. Unaffected by my touch, she gave me a sneer in return. My recollection began to reel backwards. These beauty marks were not new to me. This occurred during my time as a college student. I was conceited and unlikable then. I believed I was infallible and couldn't fathom failing. My social club and my studies felt like fun, and I wasted a lot of time there. Our club frequently went to this bar, which was decorated in the Italian style and was quite posh, ideal for courting women. We were using a mixer that day. 4 girls and 3 friends. I believe the majority of the girls showed interest in me. When my friend saw it, he became irritated. I believe he would be better off improving himself if he was going to become irritated, but he didn't seem to be that kind of person. To make matters worse, he began flirting with the young waiter who carried our lunch. The girl, who appeared to be in her high school years, was obviously uncomfortable and blushing. She had multiple piercings and pixie-cut hair that had been dyed silver. Because of the way she looked, I assumed that she could be a little rebellious. I thought she could resist the flirting, but I quickly learned that looks can be deceiving. She was unable to correct the customer too severely because she was truly upset. It didn't seem like she had the experience needed to handle things well. Seeing this, I gave the doll-like beauty sitting next to me a little signal with my eyes to hold on for a while. I had been trying to win her over. Hey, that's enough. You see she's upset, don't you? My companion was leaning toward the waitress when I reached out and grabbed him by the collar. I was able to instruct the waitress to go ahead and leave while he was thrashing around. You've gone too far, dude. I laughed and diffused the tension by giving my pal a shoulder pat. I saw the waitress bowing to me repeatedly from behind the counter. 3 little moles were visible beneath her eyes. Yes, it is correct. I remember now. Wait, the waitress from that Italian bar. Claire snapped her tongue sharply at my cry. Before I graduated, I had gone to that bar a lot. I must have seen that expression innumerable times. Aren't you going to marry that doll-like girl? Claire asked without warning. She must be referring to my college girlfriend, who had a striking resemblance to Claire. As I gave it some thinking, I had the epiphany. It's unbelievable. Claire, I may be misinterpreting, but is that costume a cosplay? I moaned as soon as I felt a stinging pain in my chin. Claire had given me a headbutt that had struck my chin. The pain made me crouch on the spot, and Claire stood triumphantly above me. Select your words wisely, young lady, she brashly exclaimed, glancing down at me and clicking her tongue as she turned to leave. It sounded to me like someone said, "Thanks for back then." Cinema manager, I have something to ask you. I yelled as I stormed into the movie theater manager's office. The manager of the movie theater smiled and remarked, "Oh, you know now." He told me that the reason he hired me was because Claire asked him to. It seems that she begged him to hire me since, although I had assisted her in the past as her first love. I was now unemployed and having difficulties. It seems like they coordinated the employment advertisements with my ticket purchase. Every employee at this art house cinema has performed a role in me. Claire tried to dress like the girl I was dating at the time since she recalled me. She clarified that while it wasn't quite cosplay, it was close. The manager of the movie theater chuckled as he informed me that Claire had promised them all to keep her appearance alteration and everything else a secret. Claire had done all the organizing. How twisted, and yet, I felt, how charming she was. Claire had returned to the girl I knew the day after. Her black hair appears to have been a wig. If she'd shown up looking like this for our reunion, slim black leggings, a white t-shirt, and a very short haircut with plenty of piercings, I would have known it was Claire. Claire pretended as if nothing had happened, totally back to her previous self. While she was eating a croissant at her desk over lunch, I questioned her softly. "So, I heard I was your first love. Have you ever found me attractive?" Claire clicked her tongue and shot me a cold look. She then averted her gaze and declared, "I hate you now." Her less than sweet remark took me by surprise, and I found myself saying, "What?" Then Claire turned to face me, a naughty smirk on her face. "You're a real younker, you know." Her lips turned a little crimson. "Well, I suppose I had better stop being a younker before then. After I do, will you kindly reconsider?" I was petting Claire's head when I felt a headbutt strike my side. I stayed stooped, groaning, and contorted in agony. As she left the office, she added, "You're so cheeky for a younker," before turning around. "I guess I can wait, though." She added some words in a tiny voice, but I didn't miss them. It seemed so far off that day she would be standing next to me in a wedding gown. So, what were your thoughts? Having a channel subscription inspires me to produce more stuff. I'll see you in the upcoming video.
The moment I married Daniel, I knew his mother, Evelyn, didn't like me. She had made that clear during the wedding planning, nitpicking every detail and dismissing my ideas as if I were some outsider trespassing on her perfect family. But Daniel loved me, and I thought that was enough. For a while, I tried to ignore Evelyn's snide remarks and her constant need to control everything in our lives. I told myself it was her way of showing she cared, even though it never really felt like care, more like domination. Everything changed a year into our marriage when I received an inheritance from my Aunt Margaret. Aunt Maggie had been more like a second mother to me after my parents passed away, and her sudden death left me heartbroken. I wasn't expecting to receive anything from her estate, but when the lawyer called, he explained she'd left me $150,000 to follow my dreams. It was overwhelming, and I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt, knowing she had saved this for me. Evelyn, of course, found out. Daniel must have mentioned it. He didn't understand the concept of keeping things private, especially from his mother. The day Evelyn came over uninvited, wearing her usual forced smile, I knew something was up. "Lauren, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with feigned warmth. "I heard about the inheritance. Such a blessing, isn't it?" I nodded cautiously. "It is." Aunt Maggie was very generous. "Well," Evelyn sighed dramatically, clasping her hands together. "I hate to bring this up, but the family estate has hit a bit of a rough patch. You know how these old properties are, constant repairs, maintenance. And with the economy the way it is," she trailed off, letting her words hang in the air like bait on a hook. I didn't bite. "That sounds stressful, Evelyn. I hope you and Mr. Preston can figure it out." Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered. "We could if we had a little help. I know it's asking a lot, but you're part of this family now. This estate is Daniel's legacy, after all. A small portion of that inheritance could make all the difference." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say, so I mumbled something about needing time to think. Over the next few days, Evelyn ramped up the pressure. She visited constantly, dropping hints about the estate's importance and how it would one day belong to me and Daniel. Daniel, ever the peacemaker, urged me to consider it. "It's for the family," he said, as if that made it okay. Reluctantly, I agreed to give her $100,000. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that keeping the peace was more important than the money. Evelyn acted grateful, but the way her eyes lit up when I handed her that check gave me a bad feeling I couldn't shake. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. A few weeks later, I overheard a conversation between Evelyn and one of her friends while they thought I was out of the house. "Oh, the estate is fine," Evelyn laughed. "That money went to something much more fun. You should see the necklace I bought. It's stunning. And I've got a trip to Paris booked for next month. My blood ran cold. I confronted her that same day, but she just laughed in my face. What's done is done, she said smugly. You'll get over it. But I didn't get over it. I started digging and found out that Evelyn had a history of manipulating people for money, including her own relatives. Furious, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a lawyer and uncovered documents showing Evelyn had lied about the estate's financial problems. Armed with proof, I not only sued her to recover my inheritance, but also exposed her schemes to the rest of the family. Evelyn's reputation was destroyed. Her so-called friends abandoned her, and Daniel, finally seeing his mother's true colors, stood by my side. The court ruled in my favor, and I got my money back, along with a sense of justice. Evelyn still tries to contact Daniel occasionally, but I've made it clear she's no longer welcome in our lives. She can keep her estate and her lies. I have no use for either. What I do have is my dignity and the knowledge that I won't let anyone, not even family, take advantage of me again. After the court ruling, I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Evelyn had been publicly exposed for her manipulation, but the emotional toll she had taken on my life couldn't be undone. The trust one had placed in Daniel's family was shattered, and I knew I needed time to heal. Daniel, for his part, was deeply apologetic. He admitted he should have seen the warning signs earlier and regretted pushing me to give in to his mother. While I appreciated his support during the legal battle, I couldn't ignore the cracks that Evelyn's schemes had caused in our relationship. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Daniel turned to me, his face etched with worry. "Lauren, I've been thinking maybe we should move. Start fresh somewhere else, away from my mother and all the drama." I looked at him, surprised. The idea was tempting. A new city, a new home, and a chance to rebuild our lives without Evelyn's looming presence sounded like exactly what I needed. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if running away was the solution. "I don't know, Daniel," I said cautiously. "Moving won't fix everything. We need to work on us first." He nodded, understanding. "You're right. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." In the months that followed, Daniel and I attended counseling to address the lingering issues in our marriage. Slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship. I also took steps to protect myself financially, setting up a trust for my inheritance and ensuring no one else could access it without my consent. It was empowering to take control of my life again. Evelyn, on the other hand, spiraled into isolation. The lawsuit and subsequent fallout had left her with few allies, and her extravagant lifestyle quickly caught up with her. I heard through the grapevine that she had to sell her jewelry and cancel her Paris trip to cover her mounting debts. Part of me felt vindicated, but I also pitied her. She had spent her entire life chasing wealth and control, only to end up alone. One day, out of the blue, Evelyn showed up at our doorstep. I froze when I saw her standing there, looking far less composed than usual. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smudged, and her eyes hollow. She was a shadow of the woman who had once gloated about her manipulations. "Lauren," she began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've lost everything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please, can we talk?" I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part of me felt a twinge of compassion. After all, I wasn't like her. I didn't thrive on someone else's misery. Still, forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean allowing her back into my life. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Evelyn," I said firmly. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." Her face crumpled, and she started to say something, but I closed the door before she could continue. Daniel, who had been listening from the kitchen, walked over and put his arm around me. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Over time, life returned to normal. Daniel and I moved forward, stronger than before, and I focused on building the future Aunt Maggie had always wanted for me. Evelyn faded into the background, a reminder of the damage greed and manipulation can cause. In the end, I learned that standing up for myself wasn't just about getting back what was stolen. It was about reclaiming my voice, my strength, and my peace of mind. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. Months turned into years, and the shadow Evelyn had cast over our lives slowly dissipated. Daniel and I had settled into a healthier, more balanced dynamic. Our communication had improved, and the trust that had been fractured was now stronger. We even bought a modest but beautiful house far from the toxic environment his family had created. It felt like a fresh start in every sense of the word. One day, as I was sorting through some old boxes in our attic, I came across a journal that belonged to Aunt Maggie. I hadn't had the strength to go through her things after her passing, but now, curiosity overtook me. I sat down and began flipping through the pages. Each entry was a mixture of her thoughts, dreams, and lessons she had learned over the years. One entry stood out. It was dated a few years before her passing and read, "Asterisk to my dear Lauren. If you're reading this, it means you've come into your inheritance. I hope you use it wisely, but more importantly, I hope you use it to create a life that makes you truly happy. Money is a tool, not a goal, and the real wealth in life is the love and peace you surround yourself with. Never let anyone take that from you, asterisk." Her words hit me like a tidal wave. Aunt Maggie had always been the voice of reason in my life, and even now, her wisdom guided me. For so long, I had focused on fighting to reclaim what Evelyn had taken, but I realized it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the sense of self-respect I had regained. That realization pushed me to start something new. I decided to use part of the inheritance to fund a program in Aunt Maggie's name, a community center that offered financial literacy classes, career counseling, and support for women going through difficult situations. It was my way of turning something painful into something meaningful, and it felt like a tribute to the woman who had believed in me. The center became a success. Women from all walks of life came through its doors, and each time I heard their stories of resilience and courage, I felt a deep sense of purpose. It wasn't just about helping them, it was about honoring the strength I had found within myself. As for Evelyn, I never heard from her again after that fateful day at the door. I sometimes wondered what became of her, but I never let it consume me. Daniel made peace with the estrangement, realizing that some relationships, even familial ones, are better left in the past. Life wasn't perfect. It never is, but it was mine, and I had built it on my own terms. Aunt Maggie's words stayed with me, a reminder that the best revenge isn't just reclaiming what was lost, but thriving in spite of it. And that's exactly what I did. Years later, the community center named after Aunt Maggie grew beyond anything I had imagined. What started as a small operation evolved into a thriving organization that not only helped women but also provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and even childcare services for struggling single parents. It became a beacon of hope for so many, and every time I walked through its doors, I felt a surge of pride. Aunt Maggie's legacy had become something beautiful, something that changed lives. Daniel supported me every step of the way. While his relationship with Evelyn had ended, he found solace in building a life centered around kindness and honesty. We had learned to prioritize what mattered most, our relationship and the values we wanted to uphold. One afternoon, as I was reviewing applications for a new mentorship program, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost unrecognizable. "Lauren," the voice said, "it's Evelyn." I froze. My immediate reaction was to hang up, but something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't the sharp, commanding voice I remembered. It was soft, almost pleading. "What do you want, Evelyn?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I don't deserve your time, but I've heard about the center. What you've done is extraordinary." She paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. "I'm calling to apologize for everything." Her words took me by surprise. Evelyn was the last person I expected to admit fault. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the pain she had caused, but another part of me, the one shaped by Aunt Maggie's teachings, chose a different path. "I appreciate that," I said cautiously. "But an apology doesn't erase the damage you've done." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. I've lost everything, Lauren. My friends, my reputation, even Daniel. I just wanted to say I'm sorry before it's too late. I didn't ask what she meant by too late. I didn't want to know. Evelyn had made her choices, and while I had found peace, I wasn't ready to let her back into my life. I told her I wished her well, then ended the call. Later that evening, I told Daniel about it. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he simply said, "You handled it better than most would have." From that moment on, Evelyn became nothing more than a distant memory. Her chapter in my life was truly closed. As the years went on, Daniel and I continued to build our lives together. We started a family, and the lessons I had learned through my struggles with Evelyn became the foundation of how I raised our children. I taught them about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of standing up for what's right. One day, as I watched our daughter play in the backyard, I thought about Aunt Maggie. She would have loved this. The life I had built, the person I had become. Her wisdom had been my guide through the darkest times, and now, her legacy was alive not just in the center that bore her name, but in the strength I had found within myself. Evelyn's greed may have tried to break me, but in the end, it only made me stronger. And that strength was the greatest revenge of all.